Numbers are in the news more than ever due to the 2020 census. Under President Obama, several federal agencies asked the Census Bureau to include questions about sexual orientation and gender identity. After Donald Trump took office, those questions were removed. Advocacy groups need numbers because statistics about communities like the LGBTQ community bear on statewide organizations and local community centers planning. Trump has tried to erase LGBTQ people in other ways, too. 2 months after his inauguration, he sought to remove data on LGBTQ persons from the annual national survey of those who receive services, nutritional service, transportation, and the use of senior centers through the Older Americans Act. Queer older adults face systemic discrimination resulting in disproportionate levels of economic insecurity and social isolation. Data on how these safety net programs serve or fail to serve LGBTQ older adults is no longer part of the survey. The Department of Justice has sought to raise the age from 16 to 18 of crime victims who can be asked if they have been a victim due to sexual orientation or gender identity. No young person is forced to disclose anything they wish to keep private, but in the past, many have chosen to reveal that they were targeted for reasons of sexual orientation or because they're transgender. Those who wish to support queer teens and reduce the frequency of such attacks need these numbers. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos has removed questions related to gender expression or sexual orientation from the data collection about students who were bullied in public schools. Eliza Byard, who worked for years to get the Department of Education to have the agency count incidents of bullying because of perceived sexual orientation or gender expression, says, for people who don't want to act on these issues, they don't want to see the problem, and it has the effect of erasing specific incidents at the top level of our data collection. Trump has no interest in these numbers, which are essential to improving policies and protections for the queer community. It's easier to minimize the presence of LGBTQ persons in our nation if we have no real numbers available. But Trump is eager to count undocumented immigrants. He was angry when the courts recently determined that the federal government couldn't legally ask people whether they are U.S. citizens as part of the 2020 census. Although federal law states that individual data from the census can't be shared with other governmental agencies and can't be used to track people down for deportation, that law has been circumvented before. Such data helped the government round up and imprison Japanese Americans in World War II. What reason have people to trust that something similar won't happen again? Undocumented immigrants often choose to avoid the census, so their numbers are unknown. Those who live in precarious housing situations also wish to evade the census, for fear of calling attention to their living arrangements and thus becoming homeless. People who live in public housing sometimes open their doors to family members or friends in urgent need of housing. But those who live in an apartment and use a Section 8 housing voucher are allowed to host a guest for only 14 consecutive days and no more than 21 nights total in any 1 year. These rules apply even to a parent, sibling, child, or grandchild if they weren't part of the original household upon application. A person found guilty of housing others without permission can be legally accused of fraud, be evicted, even lose the option for a future Section 8 voucher altogether. All of this provides reason enough to make people in such situations leery of the census. Many people who live in precarious housing arrangements are immigrants. Shortly after a seminary classmate of mine started her ministry at a Lutheran church in Manhattan, she walked her new neighborhood and wondered where the immigrants lived. Housing options like public housing, rent-stabilized apartments, and pricey condos seemed unlikely. She kept looking, and she found the answer when she went to visit the families of the children who attended the church's summer camp. One address was less than a block from the church, a large building that rented rooms to tourists on some floors and to families on others. When she visited the Ramirez family, she stepped into a 9-by-9-foot room with a bunk bed, dresser, chair, and little table. The parents slept on the bottom bunk, and their 2 daughters shared the top. There was no kitchen. Many families used a communal bathroom in the hall. The parents chose to endure the small living space because it enabled their girls to attend better schools than those in neighborhoods with cheaper rents. Her next visit was to a camper's family that lived in one of those classic Upper West Side pre-war buildings, the kind that filmmakers love. She couldn't figure out how their day camp family could afford it. Then she learned that the super of the building had carved out a bonus for himself by illegally renting space in the boiler room. Getting into the family's makeshift living space required descending a steep stairway meant for boiler maintenance, not for parents with small children lugging groceries, laundry, and strollers. The only way in or out was through a thick fireproof door that was required to remain closed at all times. It was July when she visited, but despite the oppressive heat outside and the lack of ventilation inside, the space stayed relatively cool, an advantage to living underground. The mother of the family offered my friend a cold orange soda from the jury-rigged refrigerator, and the children suddenly pointed to their colorful assortment of day camp artwork on a dresser. Upstairs, the tenants enjoyed airy, ornamented apartments with high ceilings, large windows, herringbone wooden floors, vintage brass fixtures, wide hallways. New York City law says that all living spaces must have windows and that all cellar dwellings are illegal. But when you have no other options, like the Ramirez family, you make do. Countless families like these live in and serve our nation, doing jobs that others decline to do, but they aren't likely to be counted in a census. When you look at the Hebrew Testament text, the Old Testament text from Numbers, it gets its name from the census that God orders Moses to take in the 2nd verse of the book. And the passage I especially love comes from chapters 26 and 27. The Israelite tribes have been making their way through the wilderness since leaving their enslavement in Egypt. They now stand on the plains of Moab, with their destination ahead of them on the other side of the Jordan River. When these sojourners faced the challenge of reorganizing for life across the Jordan River, They begin by taking a census. In addition to the numbers that are described, the census includes names. Each of the 12 tribes of Israel is named. Each tribe has 3 to 6 clans with their own named heads. The total is 601,730 people, none of them named except for the tribal and clan heads. But the group itself is much bigger than that because the census didn't include women and children. The first purpose of the census was to determine battle readiness. Only those who were seen as fit to fight battles were counted. The second purpose of the census was to determine how to distribute the land. Larger clans needed more land, smaller clans less. Property rights were passed on through males of each clan. In the culture of that time, the invisibility of women and children in the census isn't surprising. But what's astonishing is what we find as we move through the list of tribes and come to the 8th tribe, the tribe of Manasseh. The descendants of Manasseh, of Machir, the clan of the Machirites, and Machir was the father of Gilead, the clan of the Gileadites, and on until we hit verse 33. Now Zelophehad, son of Hepher, had no sons, but daughters. And the names of the daughters of Zelophehad were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. It's not remarkable that women are excluded from the census, but it is astounding that 5 women are named in the census. And not only are they named, their speech is recorded. They stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priest, the leaders, and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting and said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers." Zelophehad had died on the sojourn in the wilderness. The 5 sisters had no brothers, no husbands, or in-laws, therefore no rights to any land. They stood together with their people on the edge of the wilderness, but the census made clear that they didn't count for anything. When everyone crossed over, they would remain forever on the far edge, disconnected from power, land, and life. While the rest of the group mobilized itself through the census to determine critical mass for battles on the other side, these 5 sisters saw a battle to fight right where they stood, within their own community. And the battle came with a real risk. Would Moses, Eleazar, the leaders, and the entire congregation really hear the justice of their claim? As vulnerable women without men, they had the most to lose if the community rejected them, and rejection was quite likely if they agitated the leadership. But these women chose to speak out anyway. It would have been much less risky to approach Moses in private and plead with him to work out some special deal. But they understood that their well-being was connected to the well-being of others. So they made their case in public as a witness and an inspiration to others. Moses brought their case before God, and God said in our text, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they are saying. You shall indeed let them possess an inheritance among their father's brothers, and pass the inheritance of their father on to them. It shall be for the Israelites a statute and ordinance, as the Lord commanded Moses." Because they present their petition to Moses in public, their individual case serves to change the Israelite inheritance law. These sisters filed one of the earliest lawsuits ever recorded. In fact, this case is one of the oldest still cited as an authority. As recently as 1924, the American Bar Association Journal cites the 27th chapter of Numbers, describing Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah's win as an early declaratory judgment in which the property rights of women are clearly set forth. For these sisters, census-taking turned into an opportunity for power, the redistribution of wealth, and the empowerment of women. I don't think it's a coincidence that Luke tells us Jesus was born during a census. God came to earth not only in a manger, God came to earth during the season of counting. Every time I read an article about the census, every time I hear the president using the news to inflate his numbers, I'm reminded that we can put our own counting toward various ends. What I hope and pray is that we can use our latest counting for women, for the dispossessed, for immigrants, for the precariously housed, for queer people, for people of color, for all of us, that we can use our counting so it can advance the kind of community that Jesus Christ has always sought. At the Last Supper, just hours before Jesus would be pulled from his knees in prayer and arrested, then tried and tortured and eventually executed by the Empire of Rome, Jesus said this, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you should love one another." Just take a look at the beginning of our gospel text. Well, not the text, but the chapter. John chapter 13, where our text comes from today. Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. That was never done. The teacher doesn't wash the feet of his students. The wealthy don't wash the feet of the poor. But Jesus washes his disciples' feet. He turns the existing world order not only upside down, but right side up. Peter resists and says, "No, I should wash your feet, not the other way around." Jesus says, "No. If you don't let me do it, you are not part of me. You have no share in me. I have given you an example. Wash each other's feet, live in equality, mutuality, and the reciprocity of God's beloved community." And then soon after that, he says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you." Early in Clint Eastwood's film Invictus, the story of Nelson Mandela and the people of South Africa, after Mandela had been released from prison, after a new democracy was being established and elections held and he was elected president, we see Mandela assume office. He walks into the government complex, the equivalent of our White House. As he enters on this first day, we see most of the white government employees emptying their drawers, packing their things, getting ready to leave. They assume they know what's coming. He's ordered all the government workers to meet him in a large auditorium. All of the previous staff was white. All of the staff from the African National Congress was black. The same was true of the security details. He speaks to the two security details and tells them, the black and the white one, that they now must become one security detail. Then he turns and addresses everyone in the room and says, the Rainbow Nation begins here. Reconciliation begins here. Forgiveness begins here. Forgiveness is the power that liberates the soul. Love begins today. Today, everyone counts. Today, the new South Africa begins. That's not the language of power politics. That's the language of Jesus Christ. Love, forgiveness, reconciliation. Everyone counts. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you should love one another. So that from now on, everyone counts. Thanks be to God. Amen.